Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another edition of my YouTube channel, Shafakat Factors, the current affairs shows I'm doing, and inshallah, bringing different guests. Got a very special guest for you today, mashallah. And another thing I've been thinking about when I started this YouTube channel is to introduce new faces from our community as analysts, as guests, because it's always the same old faces we always see. But I think, especially the younger generation, I think it's time that my generation slowly kind of goes into the horizon. As we're moving on to the horizon, new faces, especially in the media, come forward and we hear their voices. Today, I've got a mashallah young analyst, Nasir Akram Saab. He's mashallah MBA. We've got about 4 degrees. And he's mashallah very articulate, very well spoken. But the key is, recently I've been watching, observing him. He's writing a lot of articles on geopolitical situations across the UK and Europe, and mainly he focuses on South Asia and the Indian subcontinent. So I thought, why not? We're going to get Nasser on our team here on Shafakat Factor on a regular basis, inshallah, even on panel debates as well, which I'm going to move towards in the near future. And I've been in talks with a lot of other people that hopefully they'll be joining this channel. But Nasser, welcome along, and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum, Shafaq. So basically, first of all, can I just say a big thank you to you for including us on this show. I actually eagerly await your shows. And basically, for a number of years, actually since childhood, I've actually been seeing your broadcasts. So we've actually grown up listening to your voice and looking at some of the articles that you published and some of the programs you do. And I think what appeals to me about your programs is the way in which you deliver this content. You talk about a range of issues, but you do it in a very simplistic manner that appeals to most of the different categories of customers or audience we've got. So I'm hoping that today's debate or discussion we can do in such a way that anyone and everyone can understand something that is going on in the world, and we can break it down for them, because that is the holy grail of analysis. It's to really break things down so the average person can understand them.
Exactly, Nasser, and it's nice to have. That's why I want some fresh voices, and I think, and I also feel strongly, because I've been in the media for a long time. I think that some of the debates need to move on now from party political based debates to the bigger issues and the biggest challenges facing Asia, UK, Europe, and the Muslim world in particular as well. So people like yourselves, we want to hear your input because you guys are the future. And I want to tell our audience that Nasser is originally from Sheffield, from a very, mashallah, renowned family. His dad, I have to say this because I think we need to pay respect to our elder generation. He's the son of Mr. Akram, high stores, school teacher, mashallah, well known in the community in Sheffield. So I'm proud that I'm talking to his son, and we're going to, inshallah, talk about the aftermath of the Afghanistan war. Talked to Lord Nasir Saab. We talked about the issues related to the war there, what happened, how it ended, and the Taliban taking over very, very quickly in 30 days, and the collapse of the local government and the army there in Afghanistan. But now we're going to look at, you've written an article. So that's why, because you write a lot of articles on a lot of issues, but because we're starting today, so let's go to your freshest article, which you wrote today or yesterday, about the cost of war. Very interesting. I was reading that. Tell us more. I mean, the cost of war, and you wrote there, very interesting. The majority of the people do not look at these aspects, and they'll blame the immigrants, they'll blame other people's about the problems caused by war and immigration. But your article more is based on the cost, actual physical cost that is cost and will cost in the coming days ahead. Tell us more, Nathan.
Absolutely. So thanks for the introduction, and thanks for paying respect to my father. I think we're lucky, first of all, coming from Sheffield. We've got a very good community. We're the third generation of that community, and I think we're all carrying the same baton in our different platforms and what we do. Just moving to Afghanistan. So basically, what I try to do in everything I do is take a holistic approach to looking at a problem. What I mean by that is, rather than looking at the symptoms and the small results of whatever actions taken place to look at the big picture and see what the relationships are. And I think something that the British audience and the American audience are missing is real information and insight beyond what they see in the media. They're looking for analysis, they're looking for answers, because this is a war that was started in their names, our names, and it's gone on for 20 years. And just from an economic perspective, I think the country is a very difficult stage, because we've just recovered. Well, we're just coming out of COVID. We're not quite there. I think people are uncertain as to what the economic impact of COVID has been. We've also made the decision to come out of Europe through Brexit. Again, a big change. And then on top of this, we've come out of a war which has taken away 20 years of effort from the British government and the American government. And I think people are wondering now, what does this mean for the one of the best economies of the world? Because what makes our country so good is our economy and our links all over the world. So I think people like myself are really wanting to just get some questions and answers so that we understand what the impact to the average person on the street is, because it's easy to find symptoms like immigration and talk about refugees. And unfortunately, when I see some of the posts on social media, some of the posts are quite racist, but I take one step back and I think to myself, if I wasn't as insightful from a community perspective or analytical perspective, how would I look at the news? And I can actually sympathize with the vast majority of the British public, because they've been fed a narrative. The narrative has been, we're going to go to a country which is quite a primitive country. These guys they're causing a threat to our livelihood and way of life, and we need to get them before they get us. The vast majority of people believe the government because there's an element of trust. You have elected members, you have prime minister. We put trust in our government. And when that government goes away and says, look, we're fighting your cause, we've gone to this country and we're changing the regime and we're making the world a safer place. And then 20 years later, we've almost switched off and we've looked at other things like COVID, etc. And then all of a sudden we get this surprise that actually we've lost the war. Yeah, we've lost the war and let's just move on. And we're also going to take a few refugees. And the average member of the public's thinking, why do we want to take these immigrants? They don't belong here. Yeah, we are full as a country already. Economically, the average person is worse off than they were a year or 2 years ago. So quite rightly, the British public see this as a threat. But my purpose of doing the analysis is really to give them the big picture view so that they can actually understand that these people that are coming to our shores have actually had massive devastation, and they're actually victims of a war that they didn't start, but some of our countries actually started. So that is the context behind writing some of the articles. And if you want me to, I can go into the article that I wrote yesterday and just elaborate on some of those figures.
Some of the facts and figures that you quoted are very interesting.
Yeah, so basically, first of all, from an American perspective, the estimates from Harvard University, from the Kennedy School, which is quite a renowned school that looks at political activity in the world and provides some really factual reporting, said that the cost of war, by all estimates, a conservative figure is $2 trillion. Yeah. So $2 trillion is 1,000 billion is 1 trillion. Yeah. Now that is a vast amount of money. It has been spent. But what's more alarming is that that money that was spent wasn't actually there in the first place. So it's been borrowed from somewhere. And
Mm.
as part of the debt financing, what will be paid back is $6.5 trillion. Yeah.
Wow. Very,
So
very
that
figures.
absolutely, and they're starking figures because that $6.5 trillion will actually filter into the economy and result in higher taxation just to be able to get that money back. So I think the vast majority of the American or British public who see this as a war that hasn't got anything to do with them, if they look at the big picture, they'll realize how acutely impacted we are going to be from these wars. Yeah.
Exactly.
And just bringing it back home to the UK, the figures are 27 to 30 billion pounds we've spent. We've had, unfortunately, we've lost a lot of soldiers over in
Yes.
Afghanistan as well. And I've personally come across many soldiers and spoken to them when they've returned, and a lot of them were mentioning the comparison between the approach that the British took and the Americans, and the British approach was definitely a lot wiser. It was a lot more tactful. They tried to engage with the locals and tried to, in a lot of cases, work on infrastructure projects that would actually help the general public. But again, they asked the question why we were there when a lot of these people were living in mountains and were potentially never really going to end up on our shores or cause us a threat.
Mm. So, I mean, the, the figures you've given, I mean, what about the UK? That's American. What about the UK? I mean, where are we going to start? Already we've got pandemic. We've got a lot of issues with the pandemic. Economy is struggling. Yesterday's reports were about inflation has risen on record high, and petrol prices. You look at their rising food prices, and Brexit on top of that. So really, where do we stand as the UK with the economic situation due to the fallout of the war and Brexit and the pandemic on top of that? So it's like a very, very delicate situation for the Conservative government as well, coming up to I think the second or third year now. And uh, I mean, Boris. I mean, obviously he's got a lot of criticism for the handling of the pandemic, but he's been trying to sell this war, saying we were successful, we've done this, we've educated the ladies, we've done. There's been no major problems here in the UK, and all these things. But really, are people going to buy that?
I think it's a real hard sell for them, and I think the reshuffle in cabinet last week
Mhm.
suggests that Boris and his team are actually understanding that there's going to be a lot of difficult questions that are going to be asked. I don't think they made any drastic changes that are going to really give them buffer they need, and I think that as a country, we need to sit together. We need to have a real review of some real kind of issues and try to educate people about the big picture. And I think a lot of the academic debates need to filter into the mainstream media.
Mhm.
So academic debates in Oxford University and universities like that are very different from what we see on television. They are getting to the root causes of these conflicts and what the impacts are. I think what we need to do is start educating the masses so that we can start speaking to our elected members in our constituencies and ask them these questions and really see if we can get some answers. Because
So who's
just
going to ask
as
these questions, Nasir? I mean, that's a good, very valid point you raised there, that we need to ask the questions. Who's going to ask the question? I mean, most of the problem with our community is that either we're with Labour or with Lib Dem or any party and we stick to it, then we have certain community leaders or so-called community leaders that keep a lid on everything. And if you ask questions, you're really trying to upset if their MP comes to the local mosque or the community centre. Really, what about the younger generation? When is the younger generation going to step up and start asking the right questions at the right time in a proper manner with respect? But the questions need to be asked. But we've not asked questions for a very long time. We've just followed. If our elders followed Labour, we just continuously voted for Labour without asking questions. Now, this generation, younger generation, they've kind of become disillusioned with politics. So, who's going to ask the questions? The younger generation, or are we still going to just follow, blindly, and just because our forefathers voted for Labour or Lib Dems or Conservative, we're going to do the same?
I think that's a really valid point, and I think that my observation and speaking to a lot of people, I mean, you've been very flattering by calling me young. I'm turning 44 next week, but I engage with a lot of youngsters, do a little bit of work with universities and also some mentoring programs. And I think they are disillusioned. I think that they feel that their family allegiances sometimes stop them from asking the right questions. One of the reasons why I've actually never really entered the political arena in terms of aligning myself to a particular party is because I think that the most powerful position to be in is just being a member of the public and holding any party to account, because you are trying to look at the greater good for the country. And I think that as a community, we need to show a bit more political maturity, because I think over the last 20 years, it's been categorized by having a few favorite MPs, inviting them to our mosques and our schools, and really giving them a nice dinner, but not really asking them any good questions.
Those dinner parties are still on, going strong. And salam to Yamaha boys. And he said, Mr. Nasir is the man. You come and say, Junaid Yusuf, mashallah, salam to both of us. Welcome, salam,
Walaikum
Junaid.
salam.
The thing is, really, I mean, first, people like me who've lived in Sheffield 40, 45 years, and a lot of people to me as well said, why don't you get involved in politics? And the issue you've raised as well, one of the reasons I've never got into politics, and which maybe I should have, but I didn't, was the main thing was that when you become part of a party, that you have to toe the party line, and oh, you can't be a bit rebellious. Or but then I look at people like Nigel Benn and Frank Skinner and some famous people in this country, politicians, and they were in the George Galloway. Why is it they can do it, but some of our people, when they get to the top, they just go silent? There are like Naz Shah and others doing the good work and speaking up on issues, but there needs to be more. And if you look at the community we have, let's just look at the Muslim community, and it's about 3 million. We're still underrepresented. So the younger generation are disillusioned. How are we going to get them back into interested and say, no, take part in media, take part in politics? How are we going to get them back on board?
Well, put it this way, someone once sent, well, it's a quote by Winston Churchill, which was, if you don't embrace change if you don't take change by the hand, change takes you by the throat. Yeah. Politics is the main vehicle for change. If we're not part of the political system, we'll be in that situation where we are going to be taken by the throat. So I think we need to really show that maturity, get involved in the political debate. And I think that one of the things we have to do as a community is start to work out what a strategy needs to be. Because if we just look at the example of the red listing, over the last few weeks and months, we've just seen Pakistan as a country has been on the red list, despite its statistics figures. World Health Organization recognizes Pakistan as one of 5 case studies of best practice in the way they handled COVID. There's something missing. If we've got these ministers, we've got these lords, and we've got this political representation, it's not working. Something is missing, and I think that we need to be able to get more involved. And I think the best way to do it is in our local communities. We need to start being a bit more open, inviting people into our homes, our communities, and having that two-way dialogue. And we need to give this perception and this feeling to the community that we're a valued members of this country, which we are. It needs to be a mutually symbiotic relationship, which means that it needs to show benefit on both sides. I think what we've not done is we've almost put someone in a pedestal. I think we need to talk to people with equal footing, and I think that only comes if you know your own identity.
Bilkul. And I think this is a topic we'll inshallah go into more depth. We're going to be off track here, but this is something we'll talk about in maybe a panel debate with some more youngsters. Junaid Yusuf is saying our people prefer Pakistan politics here than politics here, but respect to the ones who are like Lord Nasir Saab. Thank you, Junaid. Let's move on to we'll talk. This is a topic that we're going to have in its entirety, inshallah, in the next future programs. Let's move on to now Afghanistan and that region, we know what's happened, but what's the game now? What's the game now for Pakistan, China, Russia, Iran, and surrounding areas? What is the game? Because Gulbuddin Hikmat Yar has said in a recent interview in Pakistan that 85 billion worth of ammunition has been left by the Americans. It wasn't by default. Maybe they've left it for a reason, so they're not very happy with that. So some people are celebrating, but he's saying that there's more to this. But overall, how do you see that scenario and that region playing out, the geopolitical situation with China, Russia, and Pakistan still having consulates there? Who's going to recognize the Taliban government? How do you see it playing out in the next coming months?
Okay, so basically, it's a very critical time, I think, for all of the regional neighbors. And, some people have termed this the greater game. Not the great game, but the greater game.
Okay.
And what I'm seeing from this, from two perspectives, is first of all, let's look at Afghanistan internally, and then let's look at it from the perspective of its neighbors. Internally, Afghanistan's in a position where Taliban are actually stronger than they were when they were previously in government.
Okay.
And one of the recent areas that they were able to get a foothold into was the Panjshir Valley, and that area is very inhospitable. They say wars are actually won by geography, not
Yeah.
by armies. Yeah. And because this terrain was so inhospitable, even from the times of Alexander the Great, all of these areas, they weren't difficult to conquer because of the armies being so strong, or the Afghans. It was the combination of the hostile terrain.
Yeah.
Now, I think from a Taliban perspective, I think all eyes are on the Taliban because they made a lot of promises and pledges. There's been a lot of neighbors who have actually coerced them into being able to come out with statements, which at this moment in time, I think everyone has to show a level of optimism because we've got no alternative. They've talked about minorities, and there's, as you will know, in Afghanistan, it neighbors so many different countries, which means that the ethnic divisions in Afghanistan have always been pivotal to who dominates Kabul. And
Yeah.
there's never been complete stability because there's so many regional neighbors who almost fuel their own ethnic groups. So you've got the Tajiks, you've got the Hazaras, you've got various other tribes. And I think this is the first time that the Taliban have opened their minds to being able to engage with all of them. And I think the national amnesty that they had was a step in the right direction. I think they've got a lot more to do to gain the trust of the international community. And one of the key areas is going to be women's rights. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a different ideal or different way of living in Afghanistan. And I think the one thing that the outside world needs to understand is we can't impose our view of the world and what freedom means to Afghanistan because they have their own view of freedom, their own ideal for how they treat women. In their eyes, a woman who is not covered is not considered to be protected. So when you look at that same thing from a different perspective, you realize they are actually, from their perspective, they're honoring women because they believe that anything valuable is always covered. Anything that has no value is not covered. So we have to educate people as to the way in which they look at things. But the core thing that we as an international community want is to make sure that there's no revenge killings. We want to make sure that women are safe, they're able to engage in education, careers, and there's absolutely nothing Islamically, from an Islamic perspective, that stops women from doing that. In fact, I was reading just a few days ago, one of the oldest universities in Africa was started by a female, a Muslim woman. So I
Mm.
think if we understand our history, we're able to then show that alternative side. Now, I think from a Taliban perspective, their immediate concern is that the fighting is stopped. Now it's a time of governance and international relations. And I think from a governance perspective, they have to learn. the hard way, because they've not had that time to actually build up to this. So I think very quickly they need some assistance from the outside world to help them govern the country. There's a shortage of funds. There was $9 billion that was frozen. I think there's a lot of regional powers that are asking America and world powers to unlock that, because people are suffering.
Yeah.
And the
There's been some
issue of,
donor conference which has raised about $1 billion, because obviously they're saying the government literally could collapse, the country could collapse, and that could be detrimental to the whole region.
yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key things, and I've got to mention Pakistan as a country. One of the things that the Pakistani Prime Minister has always talked about is Pakistan, in its wildest dream, would never benefit from chaos in Afghanistan. If you read the history of that area, Afghanistan is seen as the heart of Asia. If the heart is not at peace, the rest of the region is not at peace. And I think Pakistan almost wants peace in Afghanistan more than anyone else, because that whole area has an opportunity for prosperity with the backing of China and Russia. And
Who do you think Russia, their consulate still open, China and Pakistan, and Pakistan landed its international airlines as well back in Kabul the other day. And who's going to reckon now? That's the key. Nobody's coming forward at the moment. So do you think it'll be on, like I asked Lord Nazir Sahib as well, similar question, that do you think it'll be a block recognition? A few of these countries en masse, 4 or 5 countries say, right, we recognize the Taliban government in Kabul.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a little bit of a political waiting game. And I think that the G5, and you've got Russia and China, they are definitely going to be the ones that everyone else in the neighborhood is going to be looking at. I was reading that Antony Blinken has given a veiled threat to Pakistan not to recognize the Taliban. But I think implicitly the Americans have recognized the Taliban before the world did, because there's a senator, actually, I forget the name, who's been talking in America about the fact that the Americans must have recognized the Taliban through their dialogue in Qatar.
Yeah, because that's what I don't understand. They've been talking to them, and all of a sudden, when they took the government, now they're the bad guys again. They've been talking to them for 1 year in Qatar.
Absolutely. And I mean, the agreement that the Americans had for the 30th of August for leaving was honored by both sides. So
Yeah.
the Taliban made sure that their soldiers were escorted. That, for me, looks like a very well organized affair. It doesn't look like two sides that have just said, we're going to put the guns down and we're going to stop fighting. It's taken a lot of time, and I know a few regional powers have brokered this. So I think that from an Afghanistan perspective, the immediate concern is the financial side of things. I think that people in the area now are looking to China and Russia. First of all,
There's a lot of resources. I mean, I think maybe the Taliban is the only ones maybe can bring stability and peace in Afghanistan, because a lot of countries are eyeing the resources of Afghanistan, copper and lithium, and
lithium.
yeah, other stuff, which is very important for future technology. So, do you think obviously China has already had delegations of the Taliban going to China and promising to invest there, but with conditions that, like you said before, the Taliban behave themselves and act in a proper diplomatic way and try to make sure that everything's above board. So, do you think obviously China is already promising to link CPAC with through Afghanistan to Gwadar and to Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, etc. So, do you think that is the key now? Recognition from major players, and then future investment, because that's the only way. Because majority of the people in Afghanistan are very, very poor.
Well, put it this way, I think that you've hit the nail on the head. Without this future vision of a connected region, I don't think it would have been, this would have never happened. It would have taken a long time for the regional powers to almost come forward with the aid. Everyone would have said it's someone else's problem. And the only countries that would have really suffered would have been Afghanistan Pakistan from a refugee perspective, and Iran. But I think because there's a big incentive, I think China, Russia know that they are landlocked countries. All of the Central Asian countries are landlocked countries, and there's two opportunities with Afghanistan. One is Afghanistan has $60 trillion of raw minerals and materials like lithium, which will be needed for the next generation of electric cars and things like that. That's just
Yeah.
one example. The other thing is, in history, there was what we call the old Silk Road that
Yeah.
connected China with the rest of the world. Now, CPEC, as you've alluded to, is a one belt, one road initiative, and that
Yeah.
the whole purpose is to take energy and logistical routes to the rest of the world, because Pakistan has warm waters. And the reason why that is so important is that even in the Soviet invasion, I remember a Soviet general saying that today we've taken Afghanistan and tomorrow we'll be washing our boots in the warm waters of Gwadar, because it's very significant. Warm water ports are never frozen, so there's
Yeah.
more trade through them. I
And
think that
it's
this,
the world's largest deep sea port as well, Gwadar. So it's a key player. And there's been a lot of proxies and games against Gwadar from regional countries to destabilize it. But Alhamdulillah, it's proving to be operational now, and it's moving in the right direction.
well, this is a game changer, and then the Chinese are businessmen before they become friends or brothers. They know the potential of this route is going to keep them steady economically. They've got a population of 1 billion. Let's just look at the population of this area. You've got China, 1 billion. India's got 1 billion. Russia's got 300 million. Pakistan's got 200 plus million.
Yeah.
Bangladesh has got 140 million. Afghanistan's got 40 million. Then the Central Asian belt makes up another 60 million. You're talking 65% of the world's population live in that area. And that energy corridor is almost the lifeline for that whole area. So I think that the short term pain that all of these regional neighbors are going to have to go through is definitely worth the investment for the long term game. And
Okay,
the
we'll start wrapping up now. Your final words. I mean, how do you see in a couple of 1 or 2 minutes? Just tell us next few months recognition and American policy on Afghanistan and the European Union, NATO. How do you see it next few months, coming days? Afghanistan, that
yeah,
region, from a Western perspective.
absolutely. Absolutely. So basically, from an American perspective, there's going to be an implicit recognition. I think if China and Russia come forward and give the backing to the Afghan government, I think America will follow suit quite quickly. I think there's going to be a lot of internal pressure, and this is why America is withholding that statement. But Europe is going to come forward, because Europe has a humanitarian basis for wanting to recognize the government, so they can get their aid, their charity organizations into Afghanistan to start feeding the people who are displaced, because otherwise the blame game will start if it turns into a national catastrophe or an international catastrophe. And this is the primary reason why we're talking about those countries who were previously seeing the Afghan as the enemy are actually coming closer and closer to them, because it has all the makings of an international catastrophe, and people are going to ask, who started this war? So this is why we have to start helping, and the governments around the world are actually stepping up now. So I do see that there's going to be a sea change. I think that the Afghan Taliban will definitely have to play into this tough, softer image. They have to make sure that they respect women's rights. They have a broad-based government. They respect all the different factions in their country and come closer and make sure that there's no openings in terms of the Sunni Shia divides or anything like that.
Nasser, thank you very much. Inshallah, we will be back with you with a different topic and maybe local issues as well, inshallah, in the near future and the subcontinent. But I really appreciate you giving us time and Look after yourself and see you soon, inshallah.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and just want to thank yourself and all your listeners for tuning in today.
Thank
Khuda
you.
Hafiz.
Hafiz. And that's Nasir Akram Sahab, and he was with us from all the way from Manchester. हमारे साथ है, he's from Sheffield, and he will be a regular analyst individually and as panel debates as well, of which I'm trying to do line up on Pakistan politics as well as we go along, issues in Pakistan and of course that region and UK local issues as well, community issues. We'll talk about some issues that face the community here, the disunity in the community. There's a lot of issues I could dwell on, but more to come on Shafaqat Factor. So do please share this video in your forums and subscribe to my channel and tell other friends to subscribe as well, so we can build up a small community where we discuss issues that matter to you. Allah Hafiz from Muhammad Shafaqat.